Jalen never raised his fists, even after being shoved, mocked, and humiliated. But when he finally made one quiet phone call to his father, a retired Green Beret sniper, everything changed. Some kids walk into a new school and make friends by lunchtime. Jalen Ross wasn't one of those kids. At 13, he was already the type people called mature for his age. He didn't talk much, kept to himself, and had a sketchbook that he guarded like a secret. While the other boys were swapping football stats or pulling pranks in the hallway, Jalen sat alone at lunch, pencil in hand, shading the corner of a comic strip he'd been building since the start of the school year. He hadn't asked to transfer to Westwood Middle School in Clearwater, Florida. His mum got a new job at the county hospital, and his dad, well, Jalen didn't talk about his dad much at school. Not because he was embarrassed, but because people asked too many questions, and Jalen wasn't into explaining. The first few weeks at Westwood were quiet. Kids stared a little longer than necessary. Teachers called his name like they weren't sure how to pronounce it, even though it wasn't that hard. But nothing serious happened, until Bryce Mallory showed up. Bryce was the kind of kid that took over a room without trying, loud, confident, too many friends who laughed too hard at stuff that wasn't funny. His dad owned a chain of auto shops and donated new jerseys to the football team every season, which meant the staff gave Bryce too much rope, and he knew it. The first time Bryce messed with Jalen, it seemed harmless. He flicked the back of his ear in line at lunch. "You draw flowers in that notebook, or your feelings?" He smirked. Jalen didn't answer. He didn't even look up. That's what his dad always said. Don't feed it. Words mean less when you don't carry them, his dad once told him, while showing him how to sharpen a knife properly. Jalen remembered that. But Bryce didn't take silence well. He escalated. By the second week, Bryce was calling him J. Lame. He snatched his sketchbook one day and flipped through the pages like it was his. "Damn, you draw superheroes. What, you think you're gonna be Marvel one day?" Jalen didn't react. He just took the book back, turned around, and walked away. That's what made Bryce furious. The walking away. The way Jalen didn't flinch. It challenged him, quietly. And bullies don't like being ignored. One Monday morning, Jalen was late walking to homeroom. Bryce accidentally slammed his locker door right as Jalen passed, catching him in the shoulder. "Watch it, Picasso," he said, laughing with his friends. Jalen stumbled, bit the inside of his cheek, and kept going. The school counselor once told him that people like Bryce act out from their own insecurities. But that felt like a soft excuse. Jalen didn't need to know what was broken in Bryce. He just wanted to be left alone. He'd tried everything except telling his parents. Not because he was scared, but because he didn't want to worry them. His mom already worked 12-hour shifts, and his dad, well, his dad was different. Derek Ross wasn't loud. He didn't raise his voice or walk around like he owned the room. But there was something about him that made people sit up straighter when he entered. Even Jalen's teachers at his last school, who didn't know his background, seemed to instinctively give him space. Jalen knew bits and pieces about his dad's past. Former military, special forces, Green Beret, that kind of thing. But the details were always vague. Classified missions. Discharged with honors. No stories told at the dinner table. Just a quiet man with a stillness in him that felt like a warning no one dared test. So Jalen tried to handle it himself. He drew more, avoided eye contact, took longer routes between classes. But the more he avoided Bryce, the more Bryce pushed. But something in Jalen's silence was starting to fray, and it wouldn't take much more to snap. The week after the locker slam, Jalen stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria. He'd wait until the bell rang, duck into the library, and chew a peanut butter sandwich behind a tall stack of books near the back corner. It wasn't much, but it gave him 30 minutes of quiet where Bryce couldn't find him. Or so he thought. By Thursday, Bryce was already waiting outside the library door. "You hiding now?" he said, arms folded. "Didn't know we had a bookworm in our grade." Jalen didn't answer. He walked past him. He wasn't going to let the kid win. But that same day, he found his locker wide open. Someone had gone through it, and the sketchbook was gone. He looked around, heart hammering. The hallway was packed. Voices blurred together. He scanned the faces, and that's when he saw Bryce, holding it up across the hall like a trophy. "Y'all want to see J. Lame's diary?" Bryce called out, flipping it open. "Look, he drew himself with muscles, like he's a ninja or something." The laughter that followed was louder than anything Jalen had ever felt in his life, hot in his ears, in his chest. He walked over slowly, fists clenched but not raised. "Not yet. Give it back." Bryce held the book higher. "Say please?" Jalen stared up at him, voice steady. "It's mine. You know that." Bryce's grin twitched. Just for a second, like something about Jalen's calmness irritated him more than fear ever could. Then he dropped the sketchbook on the floor and stepped on it. Jalen didn't move. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He picked it up, dusted it off, and walked away. That night, Jalen stayed quiet during dinner. His mom was too tired to notice, and his dad was reading over some building plans. He'd taken up part-time work as a carpenter since retiring. No one asked questions. Jalen was used to that, but the next morning, things were different. There was a rumor going around that Bryce had made a video, one of the drawings, and posted it to a group chat. Jalen never saw the clip himself, but the way people looked at him in the hall, it said enough. Smirks, whispering, a teacher calling on him in class, only to say, "Oh, never mind," when he didn't raise his hand fast enough. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was exposed. He considered telling someone. Not his parents, not yet, but maybe a teacher. He even sat outside Ms. Ortega's office for 10 minutes after the last bell. But when the door opened, and he saw her chatting with a parent, laughing about her weekend plans, he stood up and left. What was he supposed to say, anyway? That he was being humiliated in slow motion while everyone watched? That nobody did anything because it wasn't loud enough to notice? Jalen knew how people operated. He wasn't failing. He wasn't acting out. So to them, everything looked fine. But it wasn't fine. The next day he went to school, head low, sketchbook zipped inside his backpack. At lunch, he stayed in the stairwell. During gym, he told the coach he had a stomachache. He wasn't avoiding school, he was avoiding a fight. And yet, no matter how many corners he cut or paths he changed, Bryce still found him. Friday afternoon. Last period had just ended. Jalen was walking toward the back exit to meet his mom when a voice called out behind him. "Hey, J. Lame!" He turned. Bryce was standing by the side of the gym, two of his friends filming with their phones. One already laughing, one pretending to narrate. "You gonna cry again, or you finally gonna do something?" Jalen didn't move. His fingers gripped the straps of his backpack so tightly they hurt. His heart wasn't just pounding. It felt like it was shaking his whole body. He looked around. Nobody came. But Jalen wasn't the same quiet boy he'd been a week ago, and Bryce was about to find out. Jalen didn't say a word. He just stood there. Bryce took a slow step forward, shoulders loose, like this was a game. The two boys behind him grinned like hyenas circling a meal. One lifted his phone a little higher. The other gave Bryce a mock drum roll with his hands. Jalen could feel every muscle in his body tightening, but he didn't raise his fists. His dad always said fights aren't won by swinging first. They're won by knowing when to act. "I asked you a question," Bryce said, stepping in close. "You gonna stand there like a statue? Or you gonna man up?" Jalen looked him in the eyes for the first time. Not with fear, just tired. Then Bryce shoved him. Not a little push. A full-on blow to the chest, hard enough to send Jalen stumbling back against the gym wall. A group of kids across the field stopped walking. Someone laughed. Someone else shouted, "Yo, he's really gonna cry!" Jalen caught his balance. He breathed in. His chest hurt. His palms were scraped. And something inside him, that thing that had kept him quiet, kept him small, cracked. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't yell. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. "Who you calling?" Bryce taunted. Your little art teacher. Jalen stared at the screen. His finger hovered over the contact list. Then he tapped one name, Dad. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice, low, steady, came through the speaker. Jay? Jalen's voice didn't shake. I need you to come. There was a pause. Just half a second. Where are you? By the gym. I'm on my way. Click. That was it. Jalen didn't even look at Bryce. He put his phone away and picked up his bag. Bryce was thrown. Wait. That it? You think calling Daddy's gonna save you? What's he gonna do? Draw a cartoon and make me disappear? Jalen didn't flinch. And that made Bryce angrier than anything. He took another step forward. You think I'm scared of your dad? Jalen looked at him for a long second. You should be. Bryce's smirk faltered. And then, nothing else happened. Jalen turned and walked away. That night, dinner was quiet. Again. Jalen's mum was working late, so it was just him and his dad. Derek was fixing a cabinet drawer in the kitchen, but his eyes kept drifting to his son. You good? He asked eventually. Jalen nodded. Yeah, but Derek didn't buy it. He moved to the table and sat across from him. You called me today. Jalen hesitated, then nodded again. He hit me. Derek leaned back. Didn't blink. Didn't clench his fists. Was it the same kid? Yeah. Derek looked down for a second. Then he asked, What do you want me to do? Jalen didn't expect the question. I don't know. You want me to talk to the school? Jalen shrugged. They won't do anything. Derek nodded slowly. Then he stood up and walked to the counter, grabbed his keys. Then I'll go tomorrow. Jalen looked up. What are you going to say? Derek slipped on his jacket. His voice was calm, like he was planning a weekend chore. Whatever I need to. Jalen watched him, unsure if he felt scared or relieved. But one thing was certain. Something was about to change. And not just for him. Because when Derek Ross walks into a room, people don't talk. They listen. Monday morning at Clearwater's Westwood Middle felt like any other. The halls buzzed with half-slept kids dragging backpacks behind them. The cafeteria smelled like reheated tater tots, and the morning announcements played on cheap intercom speakers no one really listened to. Teachers took attendance, eyes barely glancing up from their screens. But by 9:15, the atmosphere started shifting, quietly. Derek Ross had arrived. No raised voice, no slamming doors, no drama. He walked through the front doors wearing jeans, a plain black shirt, and a faded jacket. Nothing about him shouted intimidating, but when he approached the reception desk, the secretary straightened her posture before he even spoke. Good morning, he said politely. I'd like to speak with Principal Langston. I'm Jalen Ross's father. The receptionist blinked. He's in a meeting at the moment. Derek didn't frown. He didn't argue. He just looked her in the eyes and said, I'll wait. She picked up the phone, dialed. Yes, there's a parent here. Yes, Derek Ross. He says it's about his son. A pause. Then, he'll be right out. A few minutes later, Principal Langston appeared in the hallway. Tall, silver hair, stiff suit. He smiled like he'd practiced it too many times. Mr. Ross, sorry to keep you waiting. Come with me. Derek followed without a word. Inside the office, Langston gestured toward a chair. Please, sit. How can I help? Derek stayed standing. My son's been targeted by another student, repeatedly. I'm here to find out why that's been allowed to continue. Langston cleared his throat. We take bullying very seriously at Westwood. Derek raised one eyebrow. Do you? Langston shifted in his chair. Well, unfortunately, we can't control every interaction between students, and I'm not asking you to control them. Derek said calmly. I'm asking why your staff didn't intervene when a boy was harassed in your hallway, humiliated in your classrooms, and assaulted outside your gym. There were videos. Where was the adult supervision? Langston fumbled for words. Derek leaned forward slightly, voice still even. You're lucky I'm not here as the man I used to be. You wouldn't like how that conversation went. Langston blinked. I'm here as a father, but I didn't come to be managed. I came to be heard. There was silence. Thick, lingering. Then Langston nodded slowly. "What would you like us to do?" Derek didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "Where is Bryce Mallory right now?" Langston hesitated. "He's in homeroom. I'd like to speak with him." "That's not typically allowed. I won't touch him. I won't threaten him. I just want a word. You can be present if you'd like." Langston opened his mouth to object again, but something about Derek's tone, not aggressive, not pleading, made it impossible to argue with. 10 minutes later, Derek stood inside a small side room off the gym. Bryce was brought in, dragging his feet, arms crossed like he was above whatever was happening. He looked at Derek and smirked. "You J-Lame's dad?" Derek didn't flinch. "I'm his father, and you can sit down." Bryce didn't move at first. Then, unsure why, he obeyed. Langston stood awkwardly in the corner, saying nothing. Derek sat across from the boy. His voice didn't change from how he spoke at the front desk. "You don't know me, Bryce, but let me give you one fact before we go any further." Bryce raised his chin, trying to look tough. "I served 15 years in Special Forces. 8 of those were in direct action deployments. I've been in rooms with men twice your size who didn't make it out. So if your goal is to scare me, you'll need a different tactic." Bryce's smirk faltered. Just slightly. Derek leaned in. "I'm not here to yell at you. I'm not even angry. I'm here because you touched my son. You disrespected him. And before this moment, no one ever stopped you." He paused, letting the words land. "That ends today." But this wasn't just a talk. Derek had something to say that would stick with Bryce for the rest of his life. The room was silent, thick with the kind of stillness that makes every breath sound too loud. Bryce sat in the folding chair across from Derek, trying hard not to show that he was rattled. He squinted like he didn't care, like this was all just a waste of time. But his knee bounced under the table. Derek noticed. He leaned back. Slow and deliberate. "You ever ask yourself why you do what you do?" he asked. Bryce scoffed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, do you ever stop and think about it? Why you go after kids smaller than you? Why you need to make a crowd laugh to feel tall?" Bryce shrugged. "I don't know. He's weird, always drawing, never talks to nobody." "And that bothers you?" Bryce opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. "I'm asking because I've met men like you before," Derek said. "Not boys, men. In war zones. Same attitude, same grin. Same shaky knees when it really mattered." Bryce glanced at the principal. "Is this supposed to scare me?" "No," Derek said, flat. "This is supposed to teach you something before life does it in a way that can't be undone." Langston didn't move. His arms were crossed, but he was listening more than supervising now. Derek leaned forward. His voice dropped slightly, enough to make Bryce instinctively shift back. "When I was your age, I watched a boy just like you bully my little cousin. Day after day. One day he pushed him too far. My cousin hit back. Didn't know how to fight. Got jumped by 3 kids and ended up with a concussion. You know where the bully is now?" Bryce didn't answer. "In prison. For assault. He didn't learn to stop, and the world doesn't keep forgiving that." Derek tapped the table lightly. "What you're doing to Jalen, it's not going to be forgotten. Not by him, not by me. And if you don't stop now, one day you'll try this with someone who doesn't walk away." Bryce finally looked up. There was no lecture in Derek's eyes. No threat. Just truth. "You think strength is about who people are scared of," Derek said. "But real strength is how you carry yourself when no one's looking, when there's no camera, no crowd, when it's just you and your own reflection." Bryce looked away. "I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to touch you, because my son needs to see that men solve problems without violence, especially when they've had enough of it." The silence stretched again. Derek stood. "I don't expect you to apologize, but I expect you to think about everything I just said, because from today on, if you ever lay another hand on my boy, the next conversation won't happen in a school office." Langston finally stirred. "Mr. Ross, no threats, just facts." He turned to Bryce. Do better than the men who raised you, or you'll become them. Derek walked out. In the hallway he found Jalen sitting on a bench, backpack in his lap, shoulders tight. You talked to him? Jalen asked, not looking up. I did. Jalen hesitated. What did you say? Derek put a hand on his shoulder. Enough. They walked out of the building together, side by side. Not talking much. They didn't need to. But the real change wouldn't happen in that office. It would be seen in the days that followed. The next day at school, Jalen kept his head down, not because he was scared, but because he didn't know what to expect. He wasn't sure if Bryce would ignore him, mock him louder than ever, or try something worse. He knew kids like that didn't change overnight. But something in his dad's voice the day before made him believe change might actually be possible. As he walked through the main hall toward his locker, he felt eyes on him. Some of the same kids who had laughed during Bryce's performance were watching now with curiosity. A few looked away when Jalen met their gaze. One of them, Isaiah, from math class, gave a small nod. Not a smile, just an acknowledgement. Jalen opened his locker. Everything was where it should be. No torn pages, no threats, no missing sketchbook. He glanced down the hall. Bryce was leaning against a wall near the drinking fountain. Alone this time. Jalen looked for the usual grin. The smirk. The phone in hand ready to record something humiliating. None of it was there. Bryce glanced over, met Jalen's eyes, and looked away. No words. No push, just silence. Jalen didn't understand it at first. He wasn't sure if it was an act, or if something had actually landed in that room with his dad. But as the week moved on, things stayed quiet. Bryce stopped blocking his path, stopped making jokes in the locker room. One afternoon, he even changed seats during lunch without being told. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't friendship. But it was something close to peace. Mr. Langston pulled Jalen aside one morning during second period. Hey, the principal said. I want you to know we're taking all this seriously. If you ever feel unsafe again, you come straight to me. That's not a suggestion. Jalen nodded. Okay. Langston paused. You've got a good dad. Jalen smiled just a little. Yeah, I do. At home, things felt lighter, too. His mom noticed him humming while helping set the table. His dad said less, but his presence was stronger somehow, like there was less distance between them. Jalen started sketching again. Not just superheroes, but people he saw in real life. The janitor who always nodded when he passed. The girl who played cello in the orchestra. A new panel showed a quiet boy standing tall, back straight, while shadows around him dissolved. By the end of the week, Jalen sat alone at lunch, like usual. But this time, he didn't feel alone. Isaiah from math class sat down across from him without asking. Said nothing. Just unwrapped his sandwich and started eating. A few seconds later, a girl from gym class joined them. Nobody said much, but Jalen smiled to himself. It wasn't about being popular. It wasn't about winning. It was about being seen, finally, without being targeted, and being respected without having to shout. That weekend, while Jalen and his dad were washing the car in the driveway, Jalen asked the question that had been sitting in his head since Monday. Dad, did you scare him? Derek looked up from the bucket. Bryce? Yeah. I don't know, Derek said, rinsing off the hood. That wasn't the goal. Jalen paused. So what was? Derek looked him in the eye. To remind him, and you, what real power looks like. Jalen didn't answer right away. He just nodded slowly. Then he smirked. You kinda do have a superhero vibe. Derek chuckled. Don't let the bald spot fool you. They laughed. But what really stuck with Jalen wasn't the confrontation. It was the lesson his father never had to say out loud. Sunday night rolled around slower than usual. Jalen sat at the dining table, flipping through his sketchbook. He'd started a new series of drawings, quiet scenes that felt like memories. One showed a boy holding a phone, eyes steady. Another had a man sitting across from a teenager, the table between them empty but heavy. The last one was still in pencil. A boy walking through school, back straight, shadow tall behind him. His dad passed by, sipping a mug of coffee. "That new?" Jalen nodded. "Yeah. You draw fast. I've been thinking a lot." Derek pulled out the chair across from him and sat. He didn't speak right away, just looked at the sketch. Then, "What have you been thinking about?" Jalen didn't need to think. "How you knew what to say. Like, how you didn't yell. Or lose it. You just talked to him." Derek looked out the window for a second. "When you've seen real violence, you don't chase it anymore. You understand what it costs." Jalen waited. His father's voice was calm, but it felt personal, like each word had been worn in over time. Derek leaned forward. "You're strong, Jay. Not because you didn't fight back, but because you didn't let that kid change who you are." Jalen blinked. "You think I'm strong? I know you are." Jalen looked down at his sketchbook. "Sometimes it didn't feel like it. That's because we've been fed the wrong idea of strength. They sell us this image, loud, aggressive, never backs down. But real strength?" Derek tapped his chest. "It's measured in how well you hold your ground without losing yourself." Jalen let those words sit in his chest for a moment. They made sense. Not in a movie way. In a real-world, walk-into-school-on-Monday kind of way. He glanced at his dad. "Do you ever miss it? The army?" Derek smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But I don't miss who I had to be in that world. I like who I am now. And I like who you're becoming." Jalen looked away, embarrassed by the warmth rising to his face. "You didn't just teach Bryce something," Derek said. "You showed everyone that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means control. That's not something people forget." Jalen didn't say anything. He just kept drawing. That night, before bed, he slid his sketchbook onto his desk, zipped his backpack, and turned off the light. There was still school tomorrow, and there might still be stares. There might still be whispers. But things had changed. Not because his dad scared someone, but because someone finally stood still long enough to be heard, and someone else listened. The next morning, as Jalen walked through the front doors of Westwood Middle, he didn't take the side route past the gym. He walked straight through the center of the hallway. Kids moved around him. Some smiled, some didn't, but nobody got in his way. As he passed Bryce near the vending machine, Bryce glanced over and gave the faintest nod. Jalen didn't stop. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Sometimes peace isn't loud. It just needs to last. And sometimes the quietest kids carry the heaviest strength. The kind you don't learn on a playground. The kind you learn at home. If this story meant something to you, share it. Let it remind someone else that strength doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it's choosing to protect rather than punish. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories that don't just talk. They say something.